Good morning, Year 4. I hope you're all well. In today's English lesson, we're going to continue looking at different narrative poems. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to infer characters' thoughts and feelings from a narrative poem. I just want to draw your attention to this narrative poem. Now, this is a version that we haven't seen before and a layout that we definitely haven't seen before. But some poets like to write their narrative poems in this way. And before I show you the actual narrative poem, I would like you to have a think. What do you think the plot, the story is going to be behind this poem? Think of the words that you can see. Think of the sizing of the words and what this might mean. Pause the video and have a think, please. Okay, so 3 words that are standing out at me at the moment. Woman, child and dark. They are in really, really big, bold letters. That suggests to me that they're going to be an important feature of this poem. I can also see some more words such as shoots, leaves, rose, lily. Words that are associated with flowers. Is there something going to be about flower? Is a child going to pick a flower up? What's this flower got to do with this story? I can also see the words dark being repeated many times. I can see the word city being repeated many times. The words green, gravel, deep. Now this gives me the idea that maybe this poem isn't going to be so nice after all. Maybe it's going to be quite a poem full of suspense. Might be scary. What do you think? I can also see the way the poem is shaped. Can you see the picture? It looks a bit like a speech bubble. Is this someone's thoughts? Is it something that someone is saying? Now, all of these things that the poet is doing is making this really interesting, because now, before we've even read the narrative poem that we're about to read, we have a picture in our head of what might happen in this story. You might have a completely different idea to me, and that's okay too. Now, I'm going to now flick to the next page, which is going to show you the narrative poem. And I'm going to read you this poem, and I want you to think, were my predictions correct? Or was I half correct? And then what did I think would happen and didn't happen, okay? Okay. So this narrative poem is called The Child Who Was Wild. And it's written by a man called Michael Rosen. Once there was a woman, a young woman. She ran from the city, the old city. She ran to the woods, the deep, dark woods. She wasn't seen for days, weeks and months. She came out of the woods, the deep, dark woods. She came with a child who was wild. She brought the child to the city, the old city. He grew and he grew and he grew and he grew. Out of his hands grew shoots, green shoots and leaves. Out of his shoulders grew the lily and the rose. His hair was the blossom that blows in the wind. He stood in the city, the old city, with the leaves and the flowers and the blossom, falling, falling, falling on grey gravel. Was this narrative poem about what you thought it was going to be about? Brilliant. So we were right. There were main characters such as the woman and the child. Now we know that there was a woman who was running from the city, who ran to the woods. And suddenly she came out of the woods with a child and brought this child to the city. And this child grew. It was a boy. He grew, and out of his hands grew shoots, like a plant, and leaves. And out of his shoulders grew a lily and a rose. And then he stood in the city, and we don't know what he did next. I know you might have lots of questions, but keep them in your head for now, because you're going to be able to write them down in a moment. First of all, I want to remind you of the secret strings, the way that we think about poems and how poets use words effectively. Now, we have the secret strings that we looked at a few days ago, but this one is different. This one is for Maggie and the dinosaur, and I think we've looked at this one already. Now, I'm just going to remind you how to annotate the secret strings. We can look for some things in a poem to annotate, such as whether or not words are sounding like one another, whether or not words have a rhyme, like these ones here, saw, galore, dinosaur, whether or not there's that alliteration like fishes and fossils stretching up to the ceiling, that assonance, words sounding the same when you read them. Look for the rhythm, the syllabic pattern. Look for the group of words repeating itself, or any imagery that comes in your head from the type of word that people use. Earth-shattering roar, what image does that give in your head? And finally, look for words that might be opposite. So we have Maggie ran madly and Maggie just froze. So I've just given you a quick refresh there of how we annotate our secret strings. What I would like you to have a go, and I'm just going to move my face over here, what I would like you to have a go and do is annotate the Child Who Was Wild narrative poem according to the secret strings that it might have. In your resources pack, you have got this poem to be annotating. You've also got this example here for you to be having a look at too. So what I would like you to do is pause the video and spend between 7 and 8 minutes just annotating that according to the secret strings, please, and then we'll have a look at my version and have a bit of a chat about it. Pause the video, please. Okay, so this is my annotation of secret strings. Now, I haven't annotated it according to what I can see, and I'm just going to explain it to you. So, what I first noticed is there's a lot of repetition of this phrase, the old, old city, and again repeated here, and again repeated here. This to me emphasises that they want the reader to know that the city is an old and ancient place, and that might be a reason why the woman was running, and also why the child has, what has happened to this child, maybe in result of the old city. I also notice here that there was opposites in grey here. First of all, the poet has said she wasn't seen for days, and then in the next line, she's automatically said, she came out of the woods. So it's this opposition of language here that yes, she wasn't seen, but hang on, in one sentence later, in one line later, she came out of the woods, and there's this opposition of language. The poet has used opposites really well there, really effectively, to make you kind of think, well, she was seen quite quickly, but then you've got this days, weeks, and months before that tells you really she was there for quite a long time. I love how the poet has used pronouns. Now this is something that we don't always annotate in secret strings, but I did notice that the use of pronouns. For the first half of the poem, the pronoun she is emphasised a lot, whereas the second half it's all about he, his. So it's really emphasising that the woman is a she and the child is a he. It's these two people, and how halfway through the poem they talk about someone completely different. The first half is all about the woman and the second half is all about the child, the boy, and that really shows there, and I really like how the poet has used that to really split the poem into sections. A child who was wild, this rhythm, she came with a child who was wild. This rhythm, I really like that too. You've got lots of alliteration, assonance here. Out of his hands grew shoots, green shoots, grew the lily, the blossom that blows. It makes it read really nicely, and it gives the reader a bit of a picture in their mind, which also creates that imagery. And finally I've got here falling, falling, falling on grey, grey gravel. This repetition of falling 3 times and only repeating grey twice gives me the sense that the poet, really wants us to know that this person something is falling from them, and what the gravel looks like that it's falling on, that grey gravel, that alliteration with the G's there. And I think the poet has used lots of features really well here, so well done if you spotted the same as me. Now, so far you might have some questions about this poem, and what I want you to do, using our 5 W's, who, what, where, when and why, you can also use your H for how too, write down as many questions as you can. What do you wonder about the woman, the woods, the child and the city? And if you need the poem, it's right there in front of you to have a look at, scaffold some questions around what you wonder about these characters and things, the nouns that we know so far. So pause the video now and have a think, please. Okay, so some of my questions about the woman. Why was she running from the city? How did she survive the woods alone? Was the child on her own, or did she find the child? Sorry, was the child her own, her baby, or did she find the child? If so, how did she give birth safely to the baby? How did the baby survive in that environment? So maybe she found the child, who knows? The woods, where was the woods? Was it a big woods? The child, how was the child wild? Had he lived there all of his life? Had he grown up there? Was the child magical? Is that why he grew shoots and the lily and leaves out of him? How did that all happen? The city, which city was the woman in? Was the city dangerous? Is that why she wanted to leave and escape? How was it dangerous? They said it was old. How was it old? Lots of these questions that you might have, and I suspect you probably had a lot more questions than me. I definitely had a lot more questions than that, but I just didn't write them all down. So, what your task is today, I want you to imagine that you are the child in this poem. And I want you to answer the following questions on a piece of paper, but I want you to do it in the form of a monologue. Do you know what a monologue is? It's like a speech. So you are putting yourself into the shoes of the child here. You are going to answer these 6 questions, but in the form of a paragraph. So instead of writing number 1 and answering the question, you're going to write them in one long paragraph. And that makes a monologue, a speech. The first question is, what have you seen? And I've given you a little bit of a sentence starter in red here. I saw. You might have seen things in the city. You might have seen the ancient buildings. You might have seen the cars zooming past you. What have you heard? You might have heard lots of different noises. You might have heard animals. What do you think about your mother? So my mother is because you might have lots of resentment towards your mother. Maybe your mother left you in the woods alone. Maybe you found her in the woods because she'd run away from you. Or maybe you really like your mother because maybe she wasn't ever your mother. Maybe she found you in the woods when you needed help and she took you in. So that's lots of different opinions that you can decide there. What did you think about the woods? Maybe you really liked the woods. Maybe you enjoyed living there because you grew to love it because you became that wild child. Maybe you didn't like it, but maybe you didn't have a choice. That's completely up to you. What did you think about the city? So you might have thought the city was different. You might have not experienced that before. If all you've ever known is living in the woods, you might not have a clue what the city was. But in the same sense, you might have thought the city was magical, interesting, exciting. All of those adjectives that you can put in there. And why? Because. What do you think about your life? You might think your life is spectacular, unique. You might think it's unique because you know no one that has experienced the life that you have before, where they've lived in the woods their whole life and then came out into this big wide world. But this world, this city, is actually pretty ancient. And why do you think this about your life, okay? So that's what I want you to do now. I want you to have a think. Take a few minutes to have a think about all of those sentences. Don't write them down, just pause the video and have a think, please. Okay, so I've started writing my monologue, but I've only fully answered one of the questions so far, which is what did you see? Because I didn't want to give you all the answers, but I wanted to show you how to lay it out. So, I saw a busy, booming city, so loud, busy, full of strangers all rushing to walk by. Where were they going? Then I asked myself that rhetorical question. Where were they going? I didn't answer it, but I wondered it in my mind because it's a speech. You're saying what you think. There were ancient ruined buildings on the side of the road, looking as if they were about to tip over. Now that knowledge I got from the poem, the old, old city, looking as if they were about to tip over. Their narrow doorways were covered in cobwebs. Automatically, I'm giving the reader, in my monologue, that sense of this city really is old. It's busy, but it's old. Then I began to start, I heard. So I haven't started a new line, I've just continued on my monologue because it's a big long speech. I heard the sound of cars rapidly zooming past me, and that is where I'd say something else I heard too, and then I'd elaborate. And then I'd go on to answering the next one. My mother is because, and then I'd continue answering the rest of them too. That is what I want you to do today. I would like you to do about half an A4 page for your monologue, between half and 3/4 of a page, okay? Remembering that you are the child, you can see and hear and feel however you want to feel, but make sure it does link to the poem. The poem is in your resources. All of these questions are going to be in your resource pack too. Please stick to them, but please make sure you write it as a speech, a monologue. Really looking forward to read these year 4. Make sure you send them into the office and they will pass them on to me and I will give you some feedback on those. Have a wonderful rest of your day and I will see you in tomorrow's lessons. See you later, year 4.